And the world tells us if we just work hard enough, we can make our dreams come true. However, God is not interested in our self-help attempts. He doesn't care how many books you've read, how many sermons you've attended, how many podcasts you've listened to. Those things aren't bad. They're very, very good and can be very helpful. But when we turn inward to our own efforts and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we can tend to snub our nose at God and say, oh, thanks, but no thanks, I got it. Rather, can we be open-handed to embrace the provision that God provides for us and be content with nothing more? We live in this small 900 square foot condo. It's complete with a really decent sized patio. Now, when I moved in there, I was really excited because I thought, well, I'm going to make this beautiful sanctuary. And I'm going to have all these beautiful plants and have maybe a fountain out there, maybe some herbs. And I was really excited about this. And I do have lovely plants out there. They were once lovely. Some of them I might or might not be trying to resuscitate right now. Some of them I think are beyond resuscitating, to be honest. It dawned on me one day that I hadn't even been outside of from my dining room out to my patio to water my garden in that long because I had gotten myself so busy. I was so busy with working and volunteering and connecting with people and doing all good things, but I didn't have any space or time or room for any sort of even hobby of anything I enjoyed. I have a guitar hanging on the wall that I hardly play, and I used to really enjoy painting, but I have since given all of my canvases and paints and brushes away because it was taking up space for now these non-essential items because I wasn't using them. So needless to say, rest does not come easy to me. I have a hard time saying no to work, to volunteering, to getting together with people, to all of the ideas that I get in my head. Am I alone in this, or is there anybody else? Do you have a hard time saying no? All right, I'm glad to know it's not just me. And we find ourselves caught up in wearing this badge of honor of like, oh, I'm just so busy. I'm so busy doing this or doing that, and I'm just so busy. So yeah, I'd love to get together with you, but we're gonna have to make it next week or next month or next year because I'm just too busy right now. Meaningful connection is seeming to take this place where it has to wait because we're just so busy. Convinced that I am not the only one in the world who has found myself in this predicament, I did a Google search to complete the sentence, I know I'm too busy if. So see if any of these resonate with you. I know I'm too busy if I can't find time to take care of my health. Exercising, taking your vitamins, going to the doctor. I know I'm too busy if I don't remember what I had for breakfast. I know I'm too busy if I feel tired all the time. I know I'm too busy if I feel guilty spending 20 minutes of unproductive time on the couch. I know I'm too busy if I'm unable to focus. I know I'm too busy if I feel disconnected from God. Now, I'm all about getting things done, as you can probably have figured out by now in our time together, but if I'm honest, my hustle is often out of this incomplete burden I have inside of me, that if I'm not the one to get that thing done, well then it's not going to get done, or it's not going to get done right. I have to be the one that does that. What a weighty and enormous burden to carry. Romans 12:3 says, do not think of yourselves more highly than you ought, but rather think of yourself with sober judgment, in accordance with the faith God has distributed to each of you. Rest is all about trusting God to meet our needs. God designed it intentionally this way so that we put our full attention onto God rather than on our own efforts. We're going to jump into a couple different places in the Bible. So we're going to go all the way back to creation And when the Garden of Eden was created, this really was a garden of rest. The very design of rest was built in. Even the work that was put before Adam and Eve was obviously perfect. It was made simple by the animals that they ruled over, by the land that they worked. And there was a lot of simplicity and joy in that. But there was also space in the mornings and in the evenings. God would come and he would walk with and commune with Adam and Eve in the garden. There was a lot of space for true rest. And in fact, this state of rest was broken by a distrust in God. Eve allowed the voice of the serpent to convince her that God was hiding something from her. Well, Eve, are you sure that's really the way that it's supposed to be? Are you sure God's just not trying to hide something from you? I think God really just doesn't want you to be like him. So go ahead and eat the fruit. And Adam was not absolved of this because he was standing right there when Eve did this, and then he partook as well. There was a distrust of God. So what more are we looking for that we don't think is enough from God? That's the question we have to ask ourselves. So now, ever since that point of distrust, humankind has been struggling with rest ever since. Now, we're going to skip over into Exodus. And just a little further background and insight into myself. I didn't always practice the idea of Sabbath. I grew up in church, and the deepest relationship I had with the word Sabbath was reciting it as the fourth commandment in the 10 Commandments. And I knew we took a day off, and I knew my parents were off of work, and that was about it. We went to church. Sometimes we would have family over for a birthday or dinner. But then I became a teenager, and I wanted to get a job because I wanted to make money. And most of the jobs that I was able to find required that I worked on Sundays. And as I continued to get older into my late teens, early 20s, college, right? You need to do what you need to do to make money. And I thought, well, Sundays will just have to wait until I'm older. Unless you find yourself in the restaurant industry, in that case, you never get off a Sunday for anybody who's ever been in that industry before. Eventually, I was working, when I was working as a restaurant manager, I took a 3-year sabbatical from the industry, and I started to really understand the difference between taking a day off and Sabbath rest. And God really began to do a work on me during that time period. My husband, Bob, he and I used to own a gym, and it was during that time that I stepped away from the restaurant industry to work with him in that. We were attending our church and really just being pastored by some really great people that taught us what this idea meant of trusting God, trusting him enough to not work all the time. More than a day off, it's a day to refocus and recenter our attention onto God. So I ended up returning back to the restaurant industry, quickly realized this was not the right place for me any longer. I found that my soul was longing for that space to breathe, and I decided to make a change, not only for myself, but for my family, but mostly my relationship with God. But I had to go through a period of retraining. I had to retrain myself to not work more than 40 hours a week. I had to retrain myself to not look at my emails on the weekends or in the evenings or first thing in the morning. I'm not there yet, by the way. It's still a struggle. I recognized I needed to go through this retraining process, but I knew it was going to be hard. So, in God's redemptive story given to us through the Israelites, we are introduced to the word Sabbath in Exodus 16. And we're going to spend a little bit more time there. If you want to, feel free to grab a Bible and open it up. You're more than welcome to. Exodus 16. This is when Sabbath is first introduced. And you might remember the story. A little bit of background. The Israelites had just been freed from Egypt. They made their way across the Red Sea. And the Egyptians were then carried away by the sea. They had trusted God to take them out of slavery, where they were trained and retrained, where they were trained to work for 24/7 for hundreds of years. Bye, everyone. So for hundreds of years, the Israelites were now trained to work all the time. This was their life. They had trusted God to take them out of slavery, but now could they trust him to meet their everyday physical needs? So in Exodus 16:14 is where we're going to pick this up. When the dew was gone, thin flakes like frost on the ground appeared on the desert floor. When the Israelites saw it, they said to each other, "What is it?" For they did not know what it was. Moses said to them, "It is the bread the Lord has given you to eat. This is what the Lord commanded. Everyone is to gather as much as they need. Take an omer for each person you have in your tent." The Israelites did as they were told. Some gathered much and some little, and when they measured it by the omer, the one who gathered much did not have too much, and the one who gathered little did not have too little. Everyone gathered just as much as they needed. So pause there just a moment. We'll come back to the story. God met exactly what each person needed for that day. Only for that day. He didn't burden them with preparing or collecting extra manna for the next day. This was a very much a day-by-day provision process. Now, put yourselves in the sandals of the Israelites for just a moment. How many of you are planners? Are you a planner? Okay, so how many of you are thinking like, I don't know where my next meal is coming from? You better believe I'm going to collect a little extra for tomorrow. Because like this is just a miracle. Like the stuff just appeared. It's the first time. They had not lived with anything like this for hundreds of years. So I can't blame the Israelites for collecting a little extra, can you? I can't blame them. There was a lot of uncertainty at this time in their life. So now we're going to, verse 19, it says, "Then Moses said to them, 'No one is to keep any of it till morning.' However, some of them paid no attention to Moses. They kept part of it until morning, but it was full of maggots and began to smell." How often have I disregarded the wisdom of God to just be and let him provide for my needs? And just to be clear that when we rest, when we embrace that, when we respect those boundaries or when we disregard those boundaries, nothing changes about the character of God. God is still God, right? God is still God, whether or not I choose to stay in that rest. The rest he imposes on us is only for our benefit, so we can gather a taste of what the original creation was intended to be and what we are headed towards in eternity, a state of rest. It is God who's our Jehovah Jireh, God our provider. And the world tells us if we just work hard enough, we can make our dreams come true. However, God is not interested in our self-help attempts. He doesn't care how many books you've read, how many sermons you've attended, how many podcasts you've listened to. Those things aren't bad. They're very, very good and can be very helpful. But when we turn inward to our own efforts and we pull ourselves up by our bootstraps, we can tend to snub our nose at God and say, "Oh, thanks, but no thanks. I got it." Ouch. Rather, can we be open-handed to embrace the provision that God provides for us and be content with nothing more? So now we're going to turn back to the story, and we see the introduction of the word Sabbath in verse 23. He said to them, "This is what the Lord commanded. Tomorrow is to be a Sabbath, a day of Sabbath rest, a holy Sabbath to the Lord. So bake what you want to bake and boil what you want to boil. Save whatever is left and keep it till morning." So they saved it until morning as Moses commanded, and it did not stink or get maggots in it. "Eat it today," Moses said, "because today is a Sabbath to the Lord. You will not find any of it on the ground today. 6 days you are to gather it, but on the 7th day, the Sabbath, there will not be any." Nevertheless, some people went out on the 7th day to gather it, but they found none. Then the Lord said to Moses, "How long will you refuse to keep my commands and my instructions? Bear in mind the Lord has given you the Sabbath. That is why on the 6th day he gives you bread for 2 days. Everyone is to stay where they are on the 7th day. No one is to go out." So the people rested on the 7th day. This concept of taking a day off isn't another self-help gimmick or life hack. And this isn't just taking a day off from vocational work, but it can also be anything that weighs us down. Here, this very simple example is about providing food, a very basic need. This can be anything like paperwork, household duties, or even entertaining guests. When I trust God with a whole day of rest, it translates to trusting God to provide for all of my needs. From my income, to my time, to my rest, and everything in between. When I don't give in to working 24/7, this tells God I'm willing to wait for his timing and his provision. And learning to rest takes time. It takes patience. It takes asking God to meet my need. So not so that I can just do my own thing. It's asking God to meet my needs so that I can spend that time with him and commune with him. Again, as that original intention was in the Garden of Eden and where we're going in eternity. We can experience that right now. If you're like me at all, you might be wondering, well, there's still stuff to be done, right? Like there's still work we gotta do. We still gotta take care of kids and take care of work and make an income and take care of XYZ, right? That's important. If we note in the story, there are 6 days where they are going out and they are working and collecting their food. God worked for 7 days during the story of creation, and there was 1 day of rest. Ephesians 2:10 points out that we are created to do good works, which God prepared in advance for us to do. We also see that faith without works is dead. That's in James 2:26. There is a place for works. But how do we know when it's time to rest and when it's time to hustle? What if the answer is both and? In Matthew 11:28, Jesus says, "Come to me, all you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." Jesus didn't tell us to sacrifice our burdens. He didn't tell us to quit our jobs or to abandon our volunteering duties at church or in our community or to hide in the bathtub to let the kids put themselves to bed. He didn't even tell us that our burdens were too heavy. He told us our burdens are too heavy for us to carry alone. It's when we try to carry the burdens on our own that they weigh us down and we experience burnout. When we try to do it in our own power. In this verse, it's suspected that Jesus is speaking to the very heavy religious burdens that the Pharisees were putting on the people. But I see this happening today too. Not necessarily just in churches, which it can happen, but there are other burdens that people put on us. To say the right thing, to do the right thing, to post up the right picture, to go on the right vacation. If we don't get everything just right, well, we must keep trying until we do, right? But then I am reminded of the words of the psalmist in Psalm 62, "I am at rest in God alone. My salvation comes from him." I heard you guys talking about your Easter celebration coming up here in a few weeks, and Easter is such a great reminder of this rest. Our striving that we are working for, we can put that to rest. We don't have to continue striving because God sent his son Jesus to die on the cross for us so that we could have rest. He completed the work. There's no other work that needs to be done, and we can rest in him. Our identity doesn't lie in our ability on our own to accomplish, but on being God's children and allowing him to advance his kingdom through us. So how does resting tie into our worship? So in Romans 12, and that's where we're going to spend the rest of our time here, verse 1 says, "Therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship." When Paul references to offer our bodies as a living sacrifice, he is not speaking figuratively. He's really talking about our physical habits that are the overflow out of our hearts. So I used to be a nutritionist. My husband owned the gym. I was the nutritionist. And so I would meet with clients who would be talking to me about how to eat better and how to improve their diet. And so it would be very easy for me to tell them, oh, well, you shouldn't eat that, or you shouldn't eat that, or you shouldn't eat that. So let me ask you a question. If I told you not to eat donuts, what are you going to want? How many of you want a donut anyway, right? Yes, donuts. We can't just take something out that's bad. We have to know, what are we putting in? What are we replacing that with? So instead of me saying to a client, don't eat donuts, I might say, maybe you eat less donuts, but maybe you have a green smoothie once in a while, or some oatmeal and berries, or something a little bit more clean, something a little bit more healthy, and just start replacing that. Again, it's not about what we are taking away. That's only part of it. It's about what are we putting in. Rest is more than just taking a day off, and worship is more than harmonizing our voices on Sunday mornings. In response to the mercy extended to us, we are now free to worship from our whole being. God wants us, all of us, our whole part, our whole being. And it's the same with our spiritual disciplines, our to-do lists, and our time. When we align ourselves with God, just God, then out of the overflow of our hearts, that's where true and proper worship comes from. That true alignment with God, that communing with God, that's worship. Now, there's a place for singing in a congregational sense on a Sunday morning. That is great and beautiful and necessary. But worship goes deeper than that. That's an outward extension of what's in our hearts. So, how do we find rest in the midst of life's business, burdens, and blessings with the purpose of worshiping well? As I've mentioned before, I had to go through retraining, and I think that we must allow the Holy Spirit to retrain us. If you're sitting here listening to me and thinking, oh, that's me, or if you are thinking like, this doesn't apply to me at all, I feel very rested, I'm very happy for you. I would love to talk to you after the service and find out your secret. But there is likely somebody in your life that is feeling overburdened and stressed and tired and weary, that you could be an encouragement to and walking alongside with them. Romans 12:2 says, we must be transformed by the renewing of our minds. And to do this, we have to change our current thought process. So here are just some suggestions. You might find that the way you rest well is carving out extra time to sleep. Sleep is very important. Scientifically, it's proven that 7 to 8 hours of sleep for an adult is really mandatory. So if you're finding that's not happening, I challenge you to wrestle through that and name why that might be. Perhaps rest looks like for you taking a book and going and sitting at the park on a warm spring day and just catching a few minutes to read. Or maybe you like to journal. Cozy up in your favorite corner of your couch and journal for a little bit with a cup of coffee or tea. I'm not a huge fan of excessive TV show binging or screen time as a form of rest, but even every once in a while we need a day like that too. We just veg out. Personally, I love to go for walks. My husband and I would go on walks almost every day together. And this is a time for us to just, again, commune together, be together. And in the midst of that conversation, we know that God is present with us in that too. We go walking around our neighborhood. We love going to trails and walking on trails. Anywhere we can go and just walk and be. Maybe it's the fresh air, the forward movement, something, but it helps to draw us closer to God and to each other. For a Sabbath day, it also means disconnecting from anything I define as work. Now, I've had many work experiences, as I've mentioned, and it's really identifying what do I see as work, what's draining in my life, identifying that and recognizing that's something that I need to say no to on that day of Sabbath rest. So, I'm a writer currently. I love to write, and I write about mostly faith-based content. And I view writing as an expression of worship. So if I choose to write on my Sabbath, for me, that's an expression of worship, and I feel that that is okay. However, what I don't do is on that Sabbath is take a class on how to write better, or do my advertising for anything that I'm writing, or anything having to do with learning or pushing myself. If I feel like this is a stressor to me, then that's not where I want. So that writing might look like just my journaling, or it might look like God has given me an idea and I want to make sure I jot it down. There's lots of forms this can look like. As a wife and a mom, some things around our home can feel like work, and some can feel like a joy and expression of worship. So for me, I hate cleaning and I hate laundry. And so on my Sabbath day, those are items that I leave alone. I make sure that those are done the day before or the next day, but I reserve that that's the day I'm not doing that. I love to bake and cook. So if for some reason I feel inspired to be able to prepare a meal for my family, that's something a little different than maybe what I normally would, then that is in some way I feel is an expression of worship and creativity that God has given me, and be able to bless other people with that. Even volunteering in your community or your church, you have to evaluate, is this something that I feel closer to God in, or is this something I feel further away from God in? That's a question you have to ask yourself. I think it's important that when we look at a Sabbath day, we're careful not to become legalistic around it. This happened, Jesus was confronted by the Pharisees with this. They accused him of breaking the Sabbath because he healed a man on the Sabbath. But it wasn't about the act, it was about doing good on the Sabbath, doing what was right on the Sabbath. So here's 3 simple steps that I'll leave you with. The first thing is to evaluate your schedule. Really be honest with yourself. What is everything I'm doing? And be honest with yourself about how long that is taking you. How much time do you really need for that? Do you need to outsource something? Do you need to ask somebody for help? Do you need to say, you know what, I just need to say no to that thing right now? It's okay to do that. I'm speaking to myself on that too. I still have a hard time saying no. The second thing I would challenge you to do is, especially if you're somebody that relies on your calendar or your schedule a time of rest. And this might also include scheduling your day of Sabbath rest with the intention of spending that time getting closer to God. When you schedule it, make sure you communicate that to the people in your life, because if you set boundaries and you don't tell anybody, nobody else can respect those boundaries. So communicate to your family, to your friends, to your coworkers. And the third is really to remember that it is God who's the one that brings joy to your life. I alluded to this a little earlier, if you're serving in some capacity or doing something in some capacity and you're in your time of rest or on your Sabbath day, but it's causing you a lot of tension and stress and frustration, you might need to ask yourself, is this the right thing for me to be doing right now? Is this bringing me closer to God right now? And if the answer is no, or even I'm not sure, maybe you need to put a pause on that. One example that comes to mind is maybe having people over for dinner. If you're doing that always on your Sabbath, but it's causing you a lot of stress, well, maybe you need to simplify the dinner, ask people to bring things, or maybe you need to have it on a different day entirely. For me, practicing Sabbath has impacted my life in several different ways, but the biggest is that I can tell when I practice it, and I can tell when I don't. And I can usually tell about midweek, because that's when I start getting really stressed and frustrated and overwhelmed. It's because I haven't taken that time to really refocus my attention on God and to say, God, I trust you even in the midst of this. It's a reminder of that I trust you with my time, I trust you with my income, I trust you with my provision. One last point too, a Sabbath does not have to be on a Sunday. That's typical in a Christian church culture, right? Jewish culture, Sabbath is on a Saturday. But when I was working in the restaurant business, like my Sabbath was a Tuesday. So it doesn't matter the day of the week. Again, what matters is the heart. What's the heart of what you're communicating? So I encourage you to find rest that refreshes your soul. I've learned that rest is not so much a calendaring issue, it's more of a heart issue. But what I have also learned is that when we do a whole lot of living fully in the presence of Jesus, trusting that he provides for my needs so that it spills out into my work, my relationships, and my worship. That's the place I want to live at. I want to live in that restful space where Jesus is working in me and through me into my community. Let's go ahead and pray. Father, thank you so much for the good word that you provide to us throughout your scripture. Thank you for the guidance it gives us both on our work and our rest. And I pray that as we go out from this place, may your Holy Spirit retrain us away from our identity on our own attempts and to find rest in our identity as your children. Help us to trust you so that we can fully enter into your provision and rest in that. And may the overflow of our hearts reach out to those we come in contact with this week. May we be an example of you, Jesus, even in our rest. In your name, amen.